Nothing. We're ready to go.
All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to this session for Minnesota Bumble Bee Atlas volunteers for Rusty Patch Bumblebee. So one thing to note, we just had a really nice NPR piece on the Bumblebee Atlas. So maybe we can get a link and put that in here for you all to check that out. They talked with a couple of our volunteers, and it's just a nice highlight of all of the great work that you all are doing. So with that, we will go ahead and get started here. There we go. All right, so we are going to just do some general information about the Rusty Patch Bumblebee, talk about grid adoption related to Rusty Patch, where to survey, details of what to do if you do find Rusty Patch Bumblebee, and spend some time on how to identify Rusty Patch Bumblebee so that you know if you have found them. So Rusty Patch Bumblebee has been federally protected as an endangered species, was found to be at risk of extinction with the evaluation that was done, and gained protection in 2017. So there have been major declines that were first noticed around the year 2000. So before that time, Rusty Patch Bumblebee was found through most of Minnesota, most of the eastern US, down in through the Appalachians, and now is just found in these pockets in the Midwest here in Minnesota and Wisconsin, Iowa, Illinois. And then there's been another pocket that's been documented in the kind of up in elevation in the Appalachian Mountains in mostly in Virginia. So with that federal protection, each year the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service comes out with these areas that are areas that are based on recent findings. So any finding of Aphanus within the last 7 years is put into these maps, which they use as high potential zones and low potential zones. So the high potential zones are those red areas on the maps, and those are areas that are estimated to be currently occupied by Rusty Patch Bumblebee. So they take the locations and they do some modeling based on habitat usage, which is why these aren't just perfect circles, why they're all kind of jagged shapes. And then the low potential zones are areas kind of out from that they think could be occupied by Rusty Patch Bumblebees. So they might be kind of moving out into those zones. Doing for work on Rusty Patch Bumblebee, you have to have a recovery permit from the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service to be able to handle any bumblebees in those zones. So since our survey methods involve handling, that is why we have some limits on where volunteers can handle bumblebees. So that affects our grid adoption, where we have the grids that require permit, which are noted in our grid adoption form. In addition, so we determine that by just the grid is mostly covered by those high and low potential zones. We also have other grids that have asterisks next to them, where the grid is still, there's a lot of areas in the grid that aren't considered to be those high or low potential zones, but Aphanus is found in that grid, and so with looking, it's likely that those areas can expand. So we do require completion of this training and a quiz, because you would be more likely to find Aphanus in those grids. And If you are really interested in looking at bumblebees in those areas that require a permit, you can still go and do photo only surveys. So the limit is on handling bumblebees. It's not on looking at bumblebees or taking photos of bumblebees. So that is still something that you can do in those kind of permit only areas, is that you can do surveys where you wouldn't handle the bees, you would just do photos. So in terms of where to survey, with our regular survey methods, we need you to stay out of those high potential and low potential zones for your surveys. And this map is a little bit out of date. These ones up by Bemidji are not really there. So, but we do have the most up-to-date map on the website. We also I still need to get it completely up to date with the more recent high potential zones, but we also have this Google map, which can sometimes be easier. Sometimes I have an easier time using those out in the field because I just save them into my Google Maps area, so I can really quickly pull things up, and you can zoom in and locate where you are on the map and see where you are in relation to those high or low potential zones. So again, we're using information directly from the Fish and Wildlife Service for their recommendations for figuring out where to survey. So once you have figured out where to go, and we hope that all volunteers, no matter where you are, there is some chance that if you're in Minnesota, you may find rusty patch bumblebees. Their populations are so low in a lot of areas that it can take a lot of looking to find them. So it wouldn't be that surprising to find them in areas where that are not in or necessarily even near those Fish and Wildlife Service areas. So we do want all our volunteers to have an eye out for rusty patch bumblebees while you're collecting bees. And part of that being careful is following some rules. So we do use the method where we're taking our bumblebees and putting them on ice to slow them down to be able to get really good photos. And there's a recommendation from the Fish and Wildlife Service to not keep the bees on ice for more than 2 hours. And I don't think I've ever needed to keep them on ice for that long. When you're out there during surveys, usually 10 minutes is enough. There is some risk with keeping them on ice. So I do recommend trying to stick with that with like 10 to 15 minutes windows of having your bees on ice and then going through and processing your bees. If you suspect that a bee that you have is a rusty patch bumblebee, so definitely pause your survey, take the time to identify the bee. So if you as soon as you grab the bee off the flower, if you think it might be a rusty patch, that's the time to start in on seeing if you can figure out what it is. If it is a rusty patch bumblebee, we do still need good photos. So you can still chill them down on ice to make sure you can get really good photos, and then just release them as soon as possible. If you do find rusty patch bumblebee, you will need to stop your survey. You can, we do want you to let us know also right away. So we need to do extra documentation with the rusty patch bumblebee. So letting us know as soon as possible, either emailing me directly or just to the Minnesota Bumblebee Atlas email, including the date, your precise location. It's great if you can have the lat long of that location, and also the photos of the rusty patch bumblebee, and that way we can also help to confirm. So if you do this and we say, yes, that is a rusty patch bumblebee, you will need to pick a different survey site the next time that you go out. And that survey site should be at least 1.5 kilometers away. And the only ways that you could go back to that same area are if you go there with somebody who does have the federal recovery permit, and or you plan to do a photo only survey. You know, we do, of course, you know, this is gonna be a little bit difficult because we want to get more information about the rusty patch bumblebees that are there. You know, we'd love to know more about what flowers they're using, how many of them are there. But part of the reason for this protocol is we're reducing risk to those bees, and we already have this crucial piece of information knowing that they are there, and there is tons of stuff that happens just from that location information. There's a lot of protections that go into place, and different things that will happen that are triggered just by that location. So it may be like, oh darn, you know, I can't get more information, but that information that you got, if you do find a rusty patch there, it's huge. It's really impactful, even just that location information, and that, you know, date and time and place is really incredible. And then what helps is to be able to expand that area to know where they are. So going then to a different area near there, we can then, you know, expand those areas to have a better understanding of where they're occurring on the landscape. All right, any questions so far? It doesn't look like there's anything in the Q&A.
Can maybe pause for a minute just to see if anybody has questions.
Is this where we switch? All right, I'm going to stop sharing. And
okay.
do you have?
Yep.
Can you share?
Yep.
Okay.
Right, so we're gonna switch gears here a little bit and talk about how to actually identify rusty patch bumblebee. If you do have any questions relating to protocols for what you do if you do encounter a rusty patch bumblebee, feel free to put them in the chat, and we will monitor that for the rest of this time. I know Bumblebee ID is very challenging. If you want to make it a goal to be able to identify at least one species, it would be really important to be able to identify rusty patch bumblebee, and know sort of what particular characters you're looking for, because there are a lot of other species in Minnesota that can be easily confused for rusty patch bumblebee. So we'll start off here with those key characters. So the first thing that we look at is what's happening on the thorax. So we are looking for this sort of black T-shape or thumbtack or umbrella shape that you might hear it referred to as, but it's this black T-shape of hairs between the wing bases on the thorax. That top arrow on the screen here is pointing to that shape. So that's the first thing we're looking for to identify rusty patch bumblebee. Then we're looking at the abdomen. So bumblebees' abdomens are broken up into these individual segments. The first abdominal segment on rusty patch bumblebee is yellow all the way across, but then the second segment has that rusty patch. So it's sort of this small brown crescent shape of hairs on that segment, followed by some yellow at the edge. I like to think of it as a rusty patch sandwich. So you've got yellow on the first segment, a little bit of brown on that second segment, followed by more yellow at the edge. And males are similar in their coloration. So here are just some photos of what this looks like. So on the photo on the left here, we're seeing on the thorax, right between the wing bases, is this sort of T shape or umbrella shape of black hairs. Then when we're looking at the abdomen, the first abdominal segment is yellow. Second abdominal segment has this brown rusty patch here, followed by more yellow hairs that run to the edge of that segment. And the rusty patch is not always super defined. Sometimes, like we can see in the photo on the right here, it is not as dark brown in color. It might be a little bit lighter, and there can just be a little bit of variation in that. So that's something to keep an eye out for. So another photo of Rusty Patch Bumblebee, kind of another top view picture that shows this very, very clear rusty patch on the second abdominal segment, as well as a nice view of that sort of umbrella shape of black hairs on the thorax. One species that is very commonly mistaken for rusty patch bumblebee is Bombus griseicollis, which is the brown-belted bumblebee. The brown-belted bumblebee is one of the most common bumblebee species we see here in Minnesota. So it's important to be able to differentiate this one from rusty patch bumblebee. The brown-belted bumblebee, on their thorax, they have mostly yellow hairs with just kind of a central black spot of some black hairs. On their abdomens, their first abdominal segment is yellow all the way across. And then on their second segment, they also have sort of this crescent shape of brown or orange hairs, but then it's just black on the rest of those segments. The males, again, are very similar. They will also have some yellow on their face and these very, very large eyes, but you're generally looking for the same color pattern. So if we're looking at a photo of Bombus griseicollis here, we can see that there is yellow running all the way across this first abdominal segment, and then sort of this brown crescent shape of hairs, and then the rest of the segments are black. If we go back a couple slides and look at Rusty Patch Bumblebee, we're noticing that we're seeing sort of these brown hairs in a similar place to the brown-belted bumblebee, but there are yellow hairs that follow. Go back to brown-belted, so we see the brown hairs, but then we see black. So that is one of the primary differences that you're looking for when you're differentiating between Rusty Patch Bumblebee and the brown-belted bumblebee. Our next species that we're going to talk about is Bombus ternarius, which is the tricolored bumblebee. This is another species that is sometimes mistaken for rusty patch bumblebee. This is a very, very common species, particularly in the northern half of Minnesota. On the thorax of the tricolored bumblebee, again, there's lots of yellow hairs, and they also have a sort of black T-shape or umbrella shape on their thorax, but it is a little bit broader than what we see on rusty patch bumblebee. There are also lots of differences on the abdomen here. So the first abdominal segment is yellow all the way across. And the second and third segments are bright red or bright orange, followed by some more yellow. And we're noticing that there's a difference in the color. This is much more orange, much more reddish in color. And these red or orange hairs run all the way across the entire segment rather than being sort of that crescent shape of rusty patch bumblebee. The tricolored bumblebee males, again, are very similar in coloration to the females. So here is a photo of what the tricolored bumblebee looks like. We can see that this T shape or umbrella shape of black between the wing bases is much, much broader than what we were seeing on the rusty patch bumblebee. And then when we look at the abdomen, we can see this first segment is yellow all the way across. Next two segments are bright orange. Those orange hairs run all the way across the whole segment. And then there is another segment of yellow hairs. Similarly, that color on the abdomen can vary a little bit, just as with lots of other bumblebee species. So we're seeing with this one, it's a little bit lighter in color. It's a little bit more orange and not as reddish, but still similar pattern. First segment is yellow, then there's that orange color, and then there's more yellow hairs. Our next species that we're going to talk about is Bombus vagans, which is the half-black bumblebee. Sometimes these can be mistaken for rusty patch bumblebee as well. The half-black bumblebee has mostly yellow hairs on its thorax, with just some black hairs kind of in the center there. And its first two abdominal segments are yellow all the way across, and the rest of the segments are black. And again, the males are very similar in their color pattern with just some yellow on the face. So here are a few different photos of the half-black bumblebee. We can see in both of these photos actually that there are lots of yellow hairs on those first two abdominal segments that appear to be running all the way across the segment. It's important to pay attention to what is actually a different color in the hairs and what might just be shadow. Because of the place where the brown rusty patches on the rusty patch bumblebee, sometimes with the angle that you're taking your photos or where the light is coming in, you might think that you are seeing that rusty patch, but it's actually just a shadow that's happening from what's going on around the bee. So keeping an eye out for that and looking for the yellow hairs on the half-black bumblebee.
And yeah, just keep it on that photo for a second. One thing that can also happen is just it can look like there's a darker area because you're just seeing the darker cuticle exoskeleton of the bee, which you can kind of see on the male on the photo on the right here, kind of at the edge of that segment. Those are all yellow hairs, but it looks kind of darker there. But you can, if you're looking closely, you can see like, oh, that's just, you can see some of the shininess there. That's just some of the darker cuticle showing through those lighter hairs. And sometimes that can happen in that middle of the segment too, so it can look tricky.
All right, our next bee is Bombus rufosinctus, which is the red-belted bumblebee. Again, this is another one that can sometimes be mistaken for rusty patch just because they can sometimes also have some brown or reddish coloration on them. The first thing that we're looking at to identify the red-belted bumblebee is what's going on their thorax. So again, they have lots of yellow hairs, but they have sort of this oval or eye shape of black hairs between the wing bases. We call it the Eye of Sauron. So that is the first key difference between rusty patch bumblebee and the red-belted bumblebee. Then when we are looking at the abdomen, the color pattern is different as well. There can be a lot of variation in the red-belted bumblebee. They don't always have red hairs, but they are consistent in some other ways. Generally, the first abdominal segment is yellow all the way across, and then the second abdominal segment has sort of this crescent shape of yellow hairs that's either black at the edges or will be red at the edges. In this bee on the left here, we can see there are some black hairs, and then there's some more yellow, and then on the one on the right, we are seeing lots of red happening. This bumblebee in particular just has a lot of variation in it, but we're mostly looking at those first two segments that have a lot more yellow than rusty patch bumblebee would. So here are a few examples of the red-belted bumblebee. We can see in the photo on the left here, kind of there's a lot of black hairs happening in sort of that oval eye shape between the wing bases. Then on the abdomen, that first abdominal segment is yellow, followed by lots of red. Again, on the right here, we can still see that eye shape on the thorax, and then the same color pattern with the yellow on the first segment. Second segment's got a little crescent shape of yellow, followed by mostly red on the rest of the abdomen. One more species that you might mistake for rusty patch bumblebee is the lemon cuckoo bumblebee, Bombus citrinus. This is one of the parasitic bumblebees that we have in Minnesota, and in particular, the males can sometimes be mistaken for rusty patch. They also have sort of this T shape or thumbtack or umbrella shape of black hairs happening on their thorax, right between the wing bases there. But their abdomens are very different. Their abdominal segments are yellow. The first three segments are all yellow. followed by black. And because these are males, you will most likely see them late summer, end of the summer. So they're not something we really need to be keeping an eye out for so much early summer. But once you get later into your surveys and into end of July or through August, this is another one to keep an eye out for. So here's an example of this lemon cuckoo bumblebee. We can see that it's got those first 3 abdominal segments are all yellow all the way across. This is another good example of what Elaine was mentioning with being able to sort of see through to the cuticle of the bumblebee. That's, you can kind of see little bits of black peeking through here, but they're not darker hairs. It's just sort of that cuticle peeking through. We've just got yellow hairs going on these first 3 abdominal segments. So that was kind of a super brief crash course in bumblebees.
Before that, there was one that I thought, a question that I thought I could just answer live. So someone asked to explain in more detail how to identify the female rusty patch bumblebee. So maybe you want to
we can go
pop back for a minute.
Back to rusty patch bumblebee. So when we're looking at males versus females, one of the things that we look for is the antenna. So the males have usually longer antenna. And then I have a hard time with the rusty patch bumblebee male and females myself. I don't know.
Yeah, well, I think it's more just I think the question is not so much how to tell the male from female, but just like the ID for
the female. Got it. Okay. So we can look at one of the actual photos if I make it.
I'm wondering if they're wondering about the queen too, which we didn't really talk about too much at all. Yeah, so yeah, I think she's asking more about the queens.
Gotcha. Okay. I can find a photo of a queen.
Yeah, I didn't realize we didn't really have them in here. So yeah, queens are still out a bit now. So they tend to come out kind of early in the spring, but then they're out, they can be out for kind of a while. And then around this time of year, a lot of times it ends up the queens are spending more time in the nest, and we mostly see the workers. So for the worker rusty patch bumblebees, they will have that umbrella shaped black spot on the thorax. They will have that yellow on T1 and 2 with that rusty patch on that second abdominal segment, and then the rest of the abdomen is black. The queens will not have that. They tend to just have a black spot in the middle, and the first 2 segments are all yellow. We can share a video that just goes into the queen identification, but the queens tend to not have the rusty patch. It tends to just be the 2 segments that are all yellow. And so typically we see them a bit in the early spring. We don't see them for most of the summer. And then we tend to see them again kind of when the new queens are coming out. So usually in starting kind of end of July or August.
So here are just a few photos of the rusty patch queens. Like Elaine mentioned, just they've got a lot of yellow on their first 2 abdominal segments. Sometimes they can have a faint rusty patch. Yeah, so the key characters for the queens are they're pretty large. They sort of have these close cropped sort of velvety looking hairs, and then their first 2 abdominal segments are completely yellow.
My chat keeps disappearing. There it is. I'm just putting in this link for a fairly short video that just focuses on the queen ID if anybody wants to spend more time with that. One question I thought I would just, or piece of information I would add in, a question that we get sometimes is people who are interested in knowing and knowing what it takes to get one of these recovery permits if you do want to do more detailed work in those areas where the rusty patch are occurring. And so it is something that you can apply for. It is recommended that you have experience with bumblebee identification. So taking a bumblebee identification course is something that's helpful. You'll need to have a couple of recommendations, a couple of letters of reference for you. And oftentimes it helps to be connected with some kind of specific survey or research project. And it takes a while. So just if you do plan to do it, give it 6 months for the application to go through the process.
For folks that might be interested in that permitting process, we recommend like coming to some of the in-person trainings that we do. That can help kind of talk a little bit more through Bumblebee ID. We can help you get some more experience with your field methods and such.
Oh. They're not seeing people aren't seeing the chat.
Oh. Oops. Well, Elaine gets the chats fixed. The next step after completing this training is completing the Rusty Patch Bumblebee quiz. There is a QR code here that you can scan to access that quiz. Otherwise, once we get the chat working, we can put the link in there as well as make sure that it is available to you on the Bumble Bee Atlas website. So the quiz just walks through, it shows you several different species of bumblebees, and you have to determine, it's not asking you to ID all of them, it's just asking you to say if it's Rusty Patch Bumblebee or not. And then there will be some questions about what to do if you find Rusty Patch Bumblebee. We are asking everybody who is in the training required or permit required grid cells to complete this quiz, just to make sure that you have an understanding of what to keep an eye out for Rusty Patch Bumblebee.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I have no idea how to correct get this to unless I think I shut down the whole webinar and started over again. So we'll just have to share the links with all. So as long as you're signed up for the Minnesota Bumblebee Atlas and follow us, you can get those links.
One other thing that we wanted to plug during this webinar is a new opportunity to support bumblebees, gather some more data on bumblebees. The program is called Nest Quest. So this is another participatory science project that is focused on finding bumblebee nests. So we will have volunteers at 4 different sites around the Twin Cities. And volunteers will adopt a plot within one of these sites from plots that we've selected. They will go out and visit their sites every other week for 1 hour, conducting a slow meandering walk looking for bumblebee nests. And when you're out at your site, you'll be, looking for the bumblebee nest, but we'll also have you gather some general habitat data and information about what you're seeing at your sites. Not a whole lot is known about bumblebee nesting, and this will be a really great opportunity for us to learn a lot more. And we think it will be really fun for you all that are already interested in supporting bumblebees.
All right, and Allison came up with a workaround where I have answered her question with the YouTube link because otherwise we are not able to just put in our own questions. And also we can email contact the registrants. We should have the list of people who registered and can share the resources with you. But that YouTube of the Queen ID is now in the answer to Allison Carabo's question.
see, I see Heidi had a question. Is this the same training and quiz that was already available since the last training? I think I completed this. Yeah, the quiz should be the same. It's just been updated, so it has more of the Minnesota language because it had lots of things about Iowa, since our Iowa Bumble Bee Atlas volunteers also need to be trained and prepared to see Rusty Patch Bumblebee. So yes, this should all be the same and you do not need to do it again. Other questions? All right, well, if anything comes up in the meantime, you can contact just the general Minnesota Bumblebee Atlas email, or you can reach out to Elaine or myself directly. We're happy to answer any questions about Rusty Patch Bumblebee. Thank you all for taking time out of your day to join us today. We're super excited to see what people are finding this survey season.
I have yet to see any Rusty Patch Bumblebees yet this year. I've seen some pictures, but haven't seen any myself, but they're out there.
Awesome. All right. Thank you all. Have a great rest of your Friday.